Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Ali Brothers podcast. Today we have a very important, somewhat sensitive topic that we are discussing today. It surrounds the topic of sex education and pornography. In fact, it is sex education and pornography. That is the topic of discussion today. So that is what we are discussing today. Why are we discussing it? It is important that we are able to have this conversation in a mature way with each other, with our children, so that we can actually improve, because this is something that is actually very, it infiltrates into the daily lives of people quite a bit, and it really affects people's lives. How sex education is done, and how when it's done poorly or when it's done in a manner that it's not mature, it can lead to terrible outcomes. And unfortunately, the way that it's done from, we'll say from an Eastern perspective, we'll say back home, for example, for us that would be Pakistan. From that perspective, it causes a lot of issues. We want to be sensitive around this topic. We want to be, obviously we don't want to be vulgar when we address these issues, and that is of course important, but at the same time we have to educate and we have to be clear about what we are talking about. And to further explain that from an Islamic perspective, it's not acceptable to talk about these kind of sensitive issues. First of all, the Quran addresses these issues. The Quran and the Seerah, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ addresses these issues. But it does so, this is important for the balance, that it does so with coded language. It does so in a way that when you can use terms that are indicative of certain issues, then you can use them. But it doesn't mean that definitely when a term needs to be used, you use it, so it's clear, so you know exactly what you're talking about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ, that they, meaning the women, they are your wives, they are your covering, they are your clothing, and you are their clothing. So it's a very intimate image. It's a beautiful intimate image that's portrayed, but it's not done in a way that's vulgar, which
it's very nowadays classy.
It's done in a very classy way.
Approached beautifully.
Exactly. And another example is, in fact, through a statement. It's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but it was Sulaym who was asking this question. And she asked a question that had a sensitive nature to it, but she started off and she said, Ya Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He isn't shy from the truth. He isn't shy from the truth. So she already had this understanding that certain things need to be addressed, certain sensitive topics need to be explained, because of course many of these issues, for example, surrounding cleaning yourself, surrounding taking a bath in certain situations, you need to know what the ruling is.
Yep.
And so you need to be mature, and that is the way the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran addresses these issues. When you can use coded language, then you do so that you're classy about it. But when you need to be clear about something, then you are that way as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think a great place to start is to say that a lot of people, and this isn't just in more traditional countries, let's say, or Islamic places which are majority Muslim. It's also people who are from there and who have emigrated into Western society, Western countries. Right. But people of that background, especially the parents, a lot of the time they just feel like this topic is a no-go, and they can't have this conversation with their children. And where it's particularly bad is that they might have this conversation if they have sons, for example. They feel more comfortable doing that. But if they have daughters, this is they're basically ashamed of it.
Yeah,
which is, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like you were saying, there's a way to approach it, and you shouldn't be vulgar about it. But if you don't take that education into your own hands, they're going to educate themselves somehow. Right? Whether it's going to be society, their friends who are equally inexperienced. And you can see the way kind of Western society is with regards to these days. So that's the media, internet, and that's where we're going to talk about pornography. They're going to get their education somewhere. And it's really up to you, and it's in your best interest and it's in their best interest that you educate them the proper way, the best way possible. And you make this conversation as comfortable as possible, and a really, really, truly a safe place, because that's what your home should be. That's what your family should be. It should be a safe place for these kind of conversations where, they could be potentially uncomfortable, but you as parents are responsible to make them as comfortable as possible.
Yes.
And like I said, if you don't have those conversations, they are going to educate themselves one way or another.
Yeah. You should, exactly. You shouldn't demonize your children for asking questions. Rather, you should celebrate that, because they're
coming to you.
Exactly. Yeah. In this day and age,
they trust in you.
They're coming to you, and it shows that you're doing something right as well. That they're comfortable enough to come to you to ask about these certain sensitive issues, and that shouldn't only be the case with this topic. Anything, whether it's related to religion, people are also very sensitive about religion. That you need to know this. You can't ask too many questions. No, you should allow them to ask questions. They're going to learn about different viewpoints. Before it was much simpler that they would perhaps learn about different religions, what different religions believe. Now it's different ideologies that are completely destructive that they're certain to learn. Yeah. But that's a topic for another day. To start off, to get this ball rolling, I have proposed, from my experience, the list of ways that sex education is portrayed and completed from the Eastern perspective. So I have 3 methods of approach that people have. Number 1 is quite simply, it's no. No, you can't.
That's the most common.
That's the most common. No, you can't talk about these issues. No, you can't talk.
Haram.
No. Yes, you can't talk. That's number 1. Yeah, just shut down conversation. It doesn't exist. Everything is fine. Right? Okay. Number 2 is to shame the other person and to say, it's a taboo topic. Why are you even having these thoughts? Like it's unacceptable. How old are you? You're thinking of these things. This is the other approach. Terrible. And then the third approach I have here is if they come to you and they talk about it, or if you see perhaps there's a family who are very open, they're a very open family here, right, and they're addressing these sensitive issues, what was going on here? Yeah. And then you say, what disgusting, what kind of family is this? What kind of parent?
Start shaming them.
What kind of parent is this? Yeah. Or they're a deviant for asking these kind of questions. You are a deviant, you're going this way, how can you ask these kind of questions? So this is, for the most part, from our experience, this is definitely the case. Yeah. That from the Pakistani perspective, it's the issue doesn't exist. Everything's fine.
You don't talk about it. It just sort of the kids are usually just left to themselves to figure it out. And that the point you're talking about, if the parents are approached and then they shame the kids, you understand what you're saying to the kids is that, you've come to me, you become vulnerable with such something that you could be, as a kid, it's completely understandable that you're ashamed of talking about, especially with your parents. But then on top of that, they've already, they've built up the courage to come to you and to ask questions about such a sensitive topic. And what you've done on top of that is that you've shamed them for it. So now moving forward, with regards to anything else, they're going to be very, very, very careful bringing it up, because they think, okay, the first thing that you're going to do, especially if it's a sensitive topic, that you're going to shame them. So you've lost your kids' trust instantly. And if you start doing that, if you also start you start demonizing the families that do have these open discussions and they educate their kids about such topics, then what you're saying to your kids is that, okay, this is unhealthy to even talk about, these thoughts are unhealthy, which I really don't understand what kind of perspective the parents here come from. Because if your child is having those thoughts by a certain age and they're asking these questions, this is exactly indicative of health. This is exactly what is supposed to happen. That around the age you reach puberty, you have sexual urges, sexual thoughts. This is exactly the point. That's literally what puberty is.
Yes.
That you begin to develop. It's a sign of a healthy child. You should be. frankly, in this day and age, especially when we're not going to get into, the whole field of hormonal disruptors and everything.
Right.
But you should be happy that your kid is developing healthily and properly. This is exactly how it is. If your child isn't having those questions or is not showing signs of that kind of development or interest in sex, then that's the problem. That's unhealthy.
Exactly.
And that's not good. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that, okay, let's say they are, and hopefully they are developing as they should. If you shame them, you're telling them this is unhealthy. You shouldn't be having these thoughts. These are terrible. And that, like I said earlier, you're going to shame them into it. What's that going to do? That's going to push them away to, first of all, they're going to shame themselves and they're going to start conditioning themselves just by your rejection of this conversation. They're going to start conditioning themselves and telling themselves, especially, by the way, if they're even somewhat religious and they want to follow the path of religion, Islam in particular, if they're going to think, okay, this is wrong. So they'll start conditioning themselves that this is something wrong. I shouldn't be having these thoughts at all. This is purely from the devil. Anything related to sex is absolutely terrible. And I'm a terrible person if I think about sex, or if I think about a boy or a girl in a certain way, whatever it is. If I feel good being around someone, that's the psychology that you're encouraging in your own child.
Exactly.
So that's what's happening. That's the first thing. And all you've done from your perspective is like, this isn't a conversation that we need to have.
No, from your side, you have you think you have solved the issue.
Yeah.
But what has done is you have closed off any communication with it, along with many other issues.
Yeah, and that causes a domino effect into like the topics that we're going to talk
precisely,
about.
I have the domino effect right here from my experience, and my career in dentistry has definitely helped gather this research. But what happens? What actually happens? So your son, your daughter comes to you. You know, the boys and girls in school, they're learning about this stuff, and you you can't talk about this.
Shut it
down. You shut it down. What happens? Puberty happens. Surprise, surprise.
Hopefully, which is a good thing.
Puberty happens, and what happens is feelings start to come about. You start to have certain feelings, which, as you mentioned, is indicative of health, biological health.
You should be having those feelings,
what is
and
supposed
those
to
urges.
happen. Now, before exactly, this is the difference we need to be clear about. Before we would say, okay, good, this is what's supposed to happen. Today it's like, okay, good, this is what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
So because with everything that's going on, everything's being disrupted. Then, so you have these feelings. Oh, but the parents weren't open to having this discussion. So you start to have insecurity. You have insecurities about your body. You have bodily changes, which is the most...
very confusing.
It's a very confusing time. Yeah. And then you have emotion... I'll just quickly go through the domino and then dissect it. Then you have the emotions. Then you have an existential crisis. Yeah. And you're like, according to the sex education from the Eastern perspective, he has now become the devil for having these emotions. Then he comes to meet a friend. He comes to meet a friend who actually is a deviant.
Yeah.
Right? So you said that you're a deviant for having these thoughts, and he meets a friend who actually has a conversation about these things, and he explains things to him. But he actually is a deviant, and he is promoting a particular way, and
which is unhealthy.
So then what happens? He trusts this person. He gets introduced to pornography, for example, which is really not uncommon. This is absolutely not uncommon. So later it gets worse as time passes. You become more addicted to it, especially when you're not integrated in the community and society at large. This is another issue that Muslim parents have. Oh no, especially, okay, it's one thing that you're in a Muslim school, fair enough. But if you're not in a Muslim school, then you expect that your child has to be to himself the whole time, and you're not allowed to interact with the other people. Yeah. So he or she becomes even more insular, even more insecure about the situation. They become addicted, then further deterioration of mental health, focus, productivity out the window, And then physically, you start getting weaker. You start.
Yep.
Then you have the issue of sexual incompetence, which is particularly common nowadays, which is another issue that we'll get into. And then when this is the domino effect. So everything goes down. When things hit rock bottom, then he reaches out to help. He or she reaches out to help. And
when you've already compromised your health up to a certain point where you have no idea, and by that time where they've actually built up the courage to finally reach out, I promise you they've probably done at least a certain amount of irreversible damage. I would say. Well, even if we're just talking about addiction, for example, that's 100%. On some level, obviously, each case varies, but by that time, most people are addicted on some level, and they're up against it at that point.
Exactly. So at that point, there's two kind of paths that can present itself for a person. One is that they reach out for help. They call a helpline. They reach out to someone that they might trust. The second way is that they might get caught in some way, that they're caught in this in the situation. When that happens, they're taken as an outcast. They're taken as a loser. Everything about them is unacceptable.
With regards to getting caught, I think especially pornography is so prevalent these days, and combine that with the lack of actual education on the matter, on top of the fact that the parents are ignoring educating their children, it's kind of bound to happen at some point, right? So I actually know, I'll keep it as general as possible, that I know a family in particular, and this kid, as far as my interactions with him, is very nice, very lovely, and I basically was told that he was caught. I was told by a relative she caught him indirectly watching pornography, and this relative of his, she was basically saying to me that, this guy, he seems like this, and he puts on this image and everything, and he might seem very nice on the surface, but he's actually the scum of the earth, is like very close words, as kind of the closest I can get to, really. And it's really strange to me that I completely I felt so bad for that kid, because I know exactly what it's like. I know exactly kind of what he might have been through. Okay, there's no sex education. The parents didn't talk about it at all, and he got caught like this, and now he's being shamed by this relative, and she's talking about it to me. That's and I obviously have so much sympathy for that situation. I'm like, okay, that first of all, that's not really surprising to me, and it's I pray for that person. I pray for all of these people, to be free of this addiction. But it was so depressing for me to see that this relative had absolutely no sympathy whatsoever. Automatically, because she caught him indirectly, she thought, okay, basically everything to do with this person is forever negative, and anything nice that he's done for me, for anyone else, he's automatically a terrible human being, because he was caught in some way consuming pornography.
What got me concerned was that people have their own kids. And if you have people who are thinking of pornography in that way, of course, it is detrimental. It's terrible.
It is.
But if they neglect the reality that they neglect how prevalent it is, I don't think I'm mistaken in saying that if someone says to me that I've never seen any pornographic material ever, whether that's if someone was addicted to it or whether that's through an accident or something, I would almost guarantee that they're lying.
100%. That's almost honestly, that's impossible for me to believe, especially because, like I said, if you combine all of those things and frankly just curiosity, like you literally have no idea what you literally have no idea what sex is, and you want to understand what it is, especially because you're of that age. I mean, speaking from a male perspective, I'm sure it's the same with women, the curiosity, but from a male perspective, it's like all the other boys in the class, they're talking about it, and maybe you don't know as much, and you're feeling kind of left out, and you don't know, and you feel almost pressured into knowing something about it because otherwise it's shameful, in society. And yeah, where do you go? You go to the internet. And do you think you can find good sex education on the internet? No, you're going to find pornography. And that is the opposite of how you want to educate a kid. Especially going through puberty, it's especially what's kind of available now. And you think pornography is so prevalent, it's on Twitter.
Yeah.
Which is, why the hell is it on Twitter? It doesn't make any sense. But so basically that's the point. Another thing is that's one thing, like actual pornography. But look, in my opinion, kind of softcore pornography is even more. It's so nudity in general. And I'm not saying, I'm not making any statement as to whether girls should dress away or should not, do what you want. But the reality is that if you're, there's a lot of half-naked pictures on really accessible apps, on Instagram, on Twitter, and that doesn't.
You mean from a general perspective, the way that women should dress? Not from a Muslim perspective, you're saying.
Yeah. I'm not saying from a Muslim perspective. From a Muslim perspective, obviously, it's very clear. We have Islamic rules on how women should dress. But I'm saying that I'm not telling
We're
any.
not there to enforce. For
other
people,
I'm not enforcing anyone to just do what you want. That's not for me to decide or for me to enforce on anyone, and that's certainly not what I'm doing. But you have to understand that it does add to the problem.
That's exactly.
And that's. It doesn't take much for people to see that. So, basically, pornography in one way or another is absolutely everywhere. And that's the thing. So we're going back to step one, where it's basically the education there is no education. Secondly, they're shamed for it. When they're shamed for it, they're pressurized into finding something out about it, and they're also pressured because of their peers. And they find someone who their peers are not exactly the best source of information or education with regards to this topic. They have no experience, they're the same age, and they probably have access to the same things that you're going to, the path you're going to go down, which is the pornography route, to find out what this actually is. And what you see in pornography is not exactly conducive to a healthy relationship. Let's just put it that way. And that's the problem. And then what happens is you are ashamed of that. And again, it comes from a place where you don't want to be. These kids aren't bad. They're approaching this in a way which they feel like they have to, because they're not getting actual education from the source that they should. So then what happens is you're putting all of this energy into that. And pornography completely destroys you in so many different ways, not just from a psychological perspective, kind of your expectations, also how, from a male perspective, for example, how you start viewing women, the objectification of women. And everybody's complaining about the objectification of women, right? But then the women, it's also part of the problem, right? Then they show up nude on everywhere, and that's part of the being free and their rights. Fine, you exercise your rights, but understand that is part of the problem, because that is literally objectification. Is literally basically there is no person, there is no personality, there is no human being. It is literally just an object of sex, and that's what it starts to. That's how these kids are basically being conditioned when they start off like that. So that's how they start viewing women, and that's how they don't. They're going to be far less likely later on in life, or at any point, to engage in healthy relationships, and because their whole viewpoint is now warped, and the expectation from a relationship or from sex itself is now completely warped. It's completely unhealthy, and it's completely off. All that, by the way, that could have been avoided if the parents actually took the responsibility of educating their child about what sex actually is, what it's like to have healthy relationships, and have those conversations. Because otherwise, if you avoid that potentially uncomfortable conversation, then you're going to be having many, many, many more, much more extremely uncomfortable
Not
conversations.
only conversations, but decisions that you have to make. Life-changing.
Yeah.
Not even decisions, but life-changing updates, news that you might find out.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
you don't need. I mean, you don't need.
Yeah, you definitely don't need that, and you want to be an ally to your kid. I mean, why are you making it more difficult for him or her to literally just exist healthily? That's exactly what it is. And what I don't understand is, it's something that's so important. It's something that it's literally the core of humanity. It's how we continue to exist as a species. And like you said, there's a way to talk about it. There's a classy way to talk about it, but talk about it we must.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's it's extremely important to have these conversations as soon as you see these that your child is of age. And I have to say, boys are one thing, but that's especially that's another thing altogether when it comes to girls in Islamic families. God forbid they ask any questions about sex or anything.
That's not allowed, man. That's
the thing.
Terrible.
That even the parents are completely ashamed of.
No, I have to stop you there. That's too much now. I mean, what are we doing for our girls? They're gonna that's gonna go out of hand.
That's
now.
the thing, and that's truly depressing. That okay, so you have this, and it is a double standard, and I don't understand why, because both boys and girls need to be educated thoroughly on what this is. Otherwise, how do you expect them to have healthy relationships? You can't.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's understand that on a larger societal scale, what happens is boys go into relationships later for different reasons. They go into, what are they looking at? They are looking at whatever they've conditioned themselves to be attracted, which is not like they're just objectifying women. So what are they going to look at when they want to get married to someone, for example? Okay, it's only the looks that matter, and that's it, 100%. And that isn't conducive to. Also, that isn't the only thing that makes someone attractive. It's definitely part of it. It's very important, but it's not just objectifying a woman.
There's a lot more to life.
There's a lot more to life. That's it, and that's the thing. And the other way as well, the girls suffer because you're not educating them about sex. I know in particular, for example, in Pakistan, the women are shamed for even having these thoughts. For boys, for example, it's like, oh yeah, okay, boys are boys, right? They are going to have these. So at a certain point, they finally accept, or society finally accepts that, okay, sex is okay for boys or men.
Not only are they going to come about these feelings and urges, but boys are boys. They're going to act upon those urges in a way that isn't acceptable. And then there's a double standard in relation to Zina.
Oh my God, that's I'm glad you brought this up, because this is in a majority Muslim country, and it's so sad to see this, but it's so easy to perform zina these days. It's extremely easy, right? And access to it is everywhere. It's plentiful.
Yeah, just for those people who, like me, were naive a few years ago about this issue. Pakistan is a Muslim country, and we don't have MSAs and ISOCs because it's a Muslim country. That's perhaps there are societies that further the academic and the activist side, perhaps, but these things don't happen in Pakistan. Boy, was I wrong.
No, it's in a way, I have to say, in a way, it might be. No, it is more prevalent. I actually saw some recent statistic. Right. I have to double check this. I believe that Pakistan is the Pakistani population is the highest consumer of pornography on the planet. And that seems legitimate. I believe that. And first of all, how depressing and shameful is that from an Islamic perspective? But why do I believe that?
On that list, most of the highest consumers are Muslim countries.
And why is that?
If before someone challenges us on that, and we're pretty sure that's the case.
Yeah,
even if it's not, we shouldn't be anywhere close to the top.
Yeah, that definitely.
In any case,
that definitely shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is because that those healthy relationships aren't. They're not encouraged. People aren't taught about that. At least in the West. Again, this is complicating the situation further. We're not going to talk specifically about it, but in the West, at least there is education.
Right.
With regards to sex itself, there is education about sex, and people in. What was it? I think it was in primary school where maybe in 6th class, I think, where we had sex education.
Class,
yeah, it was in primary school. How old was that? Would that be 11?
Yeah.
Yeah, 11, 12-ish.
Yeah, 10, 11, 12, yeah.
Yeah, so in our primary schools, we would have that in the West, here in Ireland at least. And yeah, so at least you have some form of education. Whereas in places like Pakistan, I'm not exactly sure what it is right now.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not as open, and they don't talk about it as clearly as possible. They don't talk about the how sex is done healthily, and how, for example, when it comes to relationships and all of that, or protection, anything like that, it isn't really talked about. And what happens as a result is obviously you go down these extremely destructive channels like pornography. And here's the thing: a lot of those kids that go down that route, they're not bad kids, like I mentioned. They're only going down that because they feel like that's necessary, because they didn't have the education from their parents, or whether it's the school system or whatever it is. They're not being taught what it is, so they have to go down that route, because that, I mean, for everyone who's gone through puberty, you're going to do it. That's something you're going to find out one way or another. And just the curiosity, you're meant to find out. So
just on the discrepancy, or the double standard between girls and boys in relation to this. When it comes to Zina, for example, we see this very strongly from a cultural perspective. Not only is it acceptable culturally from that boys are going to do Zina, they're boys are boys. It's going to be the case. That is celebrated.
And Zina for non-Muslims or anyone who's it's basically a sexual intercourse outside of marriage.
So it encompasses both terms of adultery and what's the other term? Adultery and so adultery is extramarital intercourse.
Yeah. Fornication.
Premarital intercourse, fornication, is premarital intercourse. So Zina, it encompasses fornication and adultery. And there are slight distinctions between those two within Islamic law, but we won't get into that right now. What was I saying before?
Yeah, we were talking about the discrepancy between the double standards when it comes to boys versus girls and Zina.
Yes. So as I was saying, that's celebrated for boys, but for girls, even thinking about that,
or thinking about being in a relationship, like an Islamically being in a married sex, even is like, whoa, you're thinking about this, and they're shamed for it. And how is that healthy? I asked the parents, how is that healthy at all? So you want your daughter to be healthy. You want your daughter to have a family, a healthy family. How is she, just logically, how is she meant to have a healthy, happy family if she's not taught about relationships and sex and all of this? And she's basically taught anything to do with sex at all is bad. Anything.
Exactly.
And we're talking about we're not talking about extramarital or anything. We're talking about we're talking about sex in the bounds of marriage. But even in that, even when it's when it's completely allowed Islamically and halal, and not allowed, it's encouraged.
Yes.
It's seen as something shameful for the woman to even think about.
It's not even as encouraged. There is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he was asked by the poor people in Medina, and he was asked that, Ya Rasulullah, the wealthy have taken all their reward. They have gone with all their reward. They said that they they pray as we pray, they fast as we fast, and they give from the excesses of their wealth. That's not something that we can do. And he said that, do you not know of a way that you can give sadaqah? And he said that saying certain phrases like Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, all of these things are sadaqah. And he said that for a person to be intimate with their spouse is a sadaqah. And they asked, like, Ya Rasulullah, we fulfill our desires and we're giving sadaqah. Is that the case? And he said, yes. He said, tell me that if you were to do that in a way that is haram, that would be sinful. But if the person fulfills that desire in a way that is halal, that is a form of sadaqah for a person.
To completely like simplify that is that sex outside of marriage in Islam is obviously, it's an extremely sinful act. Sex when you are married
can bring great reward.
That's actually, it's a form of worship essentially because you're getting a reward for it. And that's why I'm saying that it's encouraged when in a legitimate relationship.
Yeah, and you might be asking the question that why are we bringing this this difference between men and women? We're saying this shouldn't be the case.
Yeah,
but we're not saying that it should be. We should be fair on the women. No, we're not saying that. We're saying right.
We're not saying that women
boys do it, so it should be.
If it's socially acceptable for boys to perform zina, adultery, or fornication, it should be fine for the girls to do it. No, we're saying that it obviously that should be equally unacceptable, but it should be equally acceptable to have thoughts and the urges to want to have sex for boys and girls. And that's only going to be encouraged if you are educated properly in the matter.
This, again, is another example. There's this constant clash between religion and culture. This is another place where this comes about. Religion is saying one thing, and we'll bring one hadith that shows something very, very strong about this issue. But culture says, don't talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about everything that we said. So there's the difference here again between religion and culture. Culture says that for boys to do zina, for boys to be fulfilling their desires in a way that is haram, that is acceptable, that is celebrated. That's what it means to be a man. If we come now to say that real masculinity from an Islamic perspective, because we obviously have the red pill and we have all these different ideologies now. From the Islamic perspective, this is true. That isn't masculinity. That is not masculinity.
Yeah, because also it's when it comes to that kind of casual sex, let's say, it's you're treating the other person casually, and you have basically, you're absolving yourself of any real responsibility, and that's the point. That you're meant to be in that sort of a relationship with a person that you are responsible for, so you don't just use and abuse them and throw them away. And that's protecting all of society at large. Why? So especially anyone, men or women, they're not treated casually. They're not treated like, we're talking about the objectification of women, that women aren't treated like objects. That if you are going to have a physical relationship with a woman, you must, according to Islam, you must marry them. And you must take on all responsibilities, all physical, mental, financial responsibilities as a man. And only then are you allowed, from an Islamic perspective, to have a physical relationship with that woman. And that's but you were talking about, you're talking about the double standards, basically. It's one thing I wanted to say is that, that kind of the playboy lifestyle, let's say, it's encouraged in these countries. Let's talk specifically about Pakistan. I remember, again, I'll try to be as general as possible, but it's worth bringing this up, a real life scenario. Recently, when in Pakistan, I actually heard this as, thrown to a certain someone as an insult.
Oh yeah, as a dig,
Yeah, this was the insult. The insult was to a woman, and it was actually about her sons, right? The insult to this woman was that your sons don't even have the ability to find a woman to do zina with. So your sons don't even have the ability to find a woman to perform adultery or fornication with. Yeah. And I was very confused.
It might seem like we're cherry picking examples, but this ideology is
this idea is common.
And
it was a very confusing kind of a thing, because basically, you are, from a societal perspective, you're being punished for wanting to be responsible, not wanting to be reckless, not to use women as objects, and you're being made fun of because you don't want to fornicate, you don't want to use women casually and just as objects, and you actually want to be responsible for them, and you want to do it in a way which is religiously responsible and responsible just from a basic human perspective.
Right.
But those people are being abused because that's not the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
The cool thing to do is to use women casually and sleep with as many women as possible.
Right. Just to clarify a point there, and we'll discuss these issues in more detail when we talk about masculinity and the red pill a little more. But I would assume that the perspective that this person was coming from was that Islamically they don't allow this for themselves. From that perspective, they can't do it because they don't allow it for themselves Islamically. Yeah. What would be perhaps this would be
actually, let me just interrupt before because there's this kind of the point. Basically, the dig wasn't that you're so unattractive. That wasn't the dig. Right. The dig wasn't that you're so unattractive you can't attract any female. Yes. Because that is a dig, and you should feel that, by the way, because you should make yourself as attractive as possible as a man, as a woman too. Personality perspective, physically, everything, mentally. Right. Yeah. That wasn't the dig.
The issue is morally, you're not allowing this for yourself.
The dig was basically that you're incapable of doing it because you're so religious, and that you can't even find a woman to use and abuse in that sense. Right. It wasn't that you're not physically attractive enough or mentally attractive enough.
I just wanted to clarify.
No, that was the point.
And we'll go into more detail about what you mentioned there in another podcast. So I think maybe now we can move on to some of the solutions or some of the steps that we can take to go towards solutions. And actually, before that. Well, that is the first one. Number one is accepting that the issue is present. I guess that's the.
But first of all, not even a step back from that. Accepting biology. Maybe that's a good start when it comes to that. Accepting that you actually want your child, boy or girl, to healthily go through puberty and actually have these thoughts and have these urges, because that's what indicates a healthy development of a child. Okay. So that's the first thing. You have to accept biology and that it's a good thing, like to have it. That's the first thing, because a lot of people just ignore and even talking about it, they just think, okay, like you said, the problem's gone away.
It's gone,
and you should be really concerned.
If you close your eyes strong enough, it doesn't.
It's not there. You should be really concerned if your boy or girl is not having these thoughts, or it's one way or another. The indications aren't somewhere, or they're not showing interest. Exactly. That's really concerning. And I'll say again, this is not a topic we're going to talk about at length today, but especially in this day and age, there's a lot of hormonal disruptors and a lot of things like this exist, and that's something you should actually be looking out for, because that we're not going to talk about like the water supply and food and everything, but it's very clear that kind of even puberty itself is being affected. The kind of onset of puberty, it's being affected by the modern lifestyle. So that's something you should be concerned about as well.
Right.
But anyway, that's a separate topic. Right. But that's the first thing: accepting biology for what it is, and The second thing is that you should be that safe haven for your child to come ask any and all awkward questions possible. Because the more information and education they're going to get from you, the better, as long as you do it properly, obviously. And that should be the first school. It should be the parents. Kind of actually a step back from that, before they even reach that point. This is not something a lot of people talk about, or even a lot of people who give advice on this. The first place where they're going to understand what is kind of, or where they're going to learn what a healthy relationship dynamic is going to be you yourself. As in, if you're a man, how is your relationship with your wife? Right? And as a woman, as a mother, how is your relationship with your husband? How do you express love between yourselves? Do you ever touch? Do you ever kiss? Do you ever hug? Do you hold hands? And that's another thing altogether that
I'm getting really uncomfortable here now. You mentioned all these issues.
But that's the thing. You have to show that yes, holding hands is not only normal; it's a good thing. It's how you express love. Or kissing is normal and expressing love, and that's how you should do it. If you're never touching your wife, you're never having a laugh with your wife, you're never playing with your wife, and we're not saying like be explicit in front of the kids. We're saying just normal expressions of love, like. Holding as a couple, or holding hands, and walking while holding hand, and expressing love like that, because that's where the child is going to see. And especially if you're the mother and you have a daughter, she's going to see, okay, how's my mother towards my father, who is her husband, because that's the very first school there. She's going to try and emulate you in your behavior with your man. And if you're a man and you have a son, it's going to be the exact same thing. And also, regardless of that, even if it's the opposite way, for example, so as a son, your son's standard for a woman is going to be set by the mother, because you look at the mother and you see how the mother, how a woman treats the man in a healthy relationship. So you're the one who's going to set the expectations. Otherwise, your son might have very low expectations. If you treat your husband terribly, in the future, there's quite a high chance that your son is going to have very low expectations of his wife. Because what did he see throughout his life? He saw you as a wife treating your husband very, and the same for a man. And it might even be more important for men to be these strong examples, because the women, when they see a strong masculine figure who is taking care of the wife, their mother, and loving the wife and setting really high standards, taking care of the wife, her mother, in every way possible, then that's what she's going to expect from the men or from the man that is going to come into her life. So she's not going to accept anything below a certain standard. So you, as a man, set the standard for both, whether it's a boy or a girl, and as a woman as well, as the mother, you also set the standard for both, as whether it's for the boy and the girl. And this is just by you living through your actions. And this is, from the moment they're born, they're going to see these interactions. And your kids are intelligent. Kids are intelligent in general. They're not stupid. It's not like they don't see that's where they're going to pick up. That's the first school, and the most important school is how you deal with each other in the family. And that's the standards that they are going to have. If you want your kid, if you want your boy or your girl to grow up as a man, as a woman, and have very high standards for themselves in another man or a woman, then you have to treat each other as husband and wife extremely well. And you have to express love in a healthy way. And you have to express that kind of, there's going to be arguments, for example, but when they see, oh, mom and dad fight, but they always come back together and they're always happy at the end and they figure it out, that's the standard you're going to set for them. That's the very first school. Before a conversation is even a possibility, before they become of age, before they go through puberty, that's the very first way that you can teach them.
That's a really strong point, and it's not something that people mention.
I haven't actually heard that in a lot of online conversations about this. Is that you have to have a good relationship with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. From the male perspective, from a man's perspective, we can say that if you, as a father figure, are if you expect your son to be someone who respects women. Who is going to have love and respect for his wife and women in general. And if you don't show that kind of respect and love and care when it comes to you dealing with your wife, you can't expect anything from your son. From your perspective, hopefully, we hope that society might help.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing to expect. No. It's not something that we can count on, society.
Definitely not.
But perhaps if they have a good relationship with other Muslim families, with the imam, for example, very rare. But if that's the case, then perhaps they might turn out to be that way. But if you are not living the example that you want for your son, you can't expect anything from your son.
No, and that's really challenging because it's easy to be a good man. Say that.
Yeah.
To kind of wag your finger, the finger wagging technique. Be a good man. Don't do this. But if you say that to your son, but you're treating your wife like crap. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that he's going to treat women well? Or the same for a woman? You think the woman is going to treat the men in her life well, or she's going to respect them? If you, as a mother, don't show love or respect to your husband, no, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how much you say. It's about all of your actions. And not only that, but you're proving to the children that by living this way towards my husband or my wife, I'm having a better life. And that's why they're going to follow that. But if that's only then will they try and follow that, because they see success in that method. So the first thing is you have to be a very good wife or a husband yourself. And that's not easy. That's not easy. And that's what we talk about. That's the long road. The short lesson is don't do this, do that. Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the route a lot of people go down, that they don't actually act the life out that they preach to others.
Yeah.
But that kind of hypocrisy, which is what it is, it's not going to work on your children, especially because they are surrounded by you constantly. So
yeah, and I suppose being the example that is necessary, being the best example for your kids in this regard, it also helps facilitate the environment, the environment that makes things easy, a relaxed environment, a safe environment for kids to approach questions and these kind of issues that they have. Talking about the issue of creating a safe environment, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of within the family, within society, and we'll specifically talk about the masjid, for example, and we'll talk about these two things. But to quickly give a reference so that people know, again, what the religion actually says and how the Prophet ﷺ deals with these issues. This is a hadith that you know that I love to mention, because there's so much that we can gain from this hadith. It's not even specific to the topic, but just the way the Prophet ﷺ approached this question. So it's mentioned that a young man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, give me permission to commit adultery." So the man, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, "Give me permission to commit adultery." So note the request. It's not even a question. The request is he is seeking permission to commit adultery. So he knows that it's something haram. It's not acceptable. But if there is someone who's going to give some leeway, it would be the Prophet ﷺ, maybe. So he goes to him and he asks a question. Even there, if we stop there, there's so much that we can get from that regardless of the Prophet ﷺ's response, regardless of the response of the Sahaba, regardless of anything, to stop there, the fact that this person was brave enough to ask the question shows not that he was a big, strong man, that he could ask, confront the Prophet ﷺ in this way. No, it shows that the Prophet ﷺ was so open that he knew, the person making the request knew that I'm not going to be ridiculed, I'm not going to be cast aside, I'm not going to be pushed away, I'm not going to be rebuked by the Prophet ﷺ.
Regardless of being or coming with such a ridiculous request, he knows it's a ridiculous request, he is still in a safe place with the Prophet. Like you said, the Prophet isn't going to ridicule him.
Talking about the examples that we'll give later on, he was in the masjid.
Right.
Also, he was in the masjid, and the Sahaba were around him, and the reaction of the Sahaba, the Sahaba, as we would react as well. The people, they turned to rebuke him, saying, "Quiet, quiet." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Come here." So he said, "Come here." The young man came close and he told him to sit down. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, and he started explaining, he said, "Would you like that for your mother?" The man said, "No, by Allah, may I be sacrificed for you." It's a term of endearment. It shows love for the Prophet ﷺ, this phrase. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, neither would people like it for their mothers. And he said, would you like it for your daughter? Would you like it for your sister? Would you like it for your aunt? So he asked these questions, and he said, no, I wouldn't like it. And he said, neither will other people like it for their family members. Note the way the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't answer the question, and he knew what the man was actually asking. He didn't come from the perspective that no, I can't because it's haram, and this is the evidence for it. This is the Quran and this is the Sunnah that proves this. He didn't mention any of that, and in fact, the examples that he gave, they don't make that haram in and of itself. Those things are there. Of course, that's something for us to think about. But zina is haram because Allah has made that haram. Yeah. We think of it quite simplistically, but that's how we operate as Muslims, with the objective moral perspective that we have. So he explained it in a way that the young man would understand, because he knew the question that he was actually asking, or the thing that he was actually saying, was that, Ya Rasulullah, I'm finding this difficult. Yeah. This isn't easy for me. And in that, he came with that request. And later, the Prophet ﷺ, he put his hand on him. And he said, Allahumma ghafir dhanbah wa tahhir qalbah wa hassin farjah. Oh Allah, forgive his sins, purify his heart, and guard his chastity. And it says that after that, the young man never again was inclined to anything harmful. The last part obviously isn't something that we can induce as people, as followers of the Prophet ﷺ, but we can definitely make an effort to follow his character, to follow his example in this regard. So that's the evidence. That's how the Prophet ﷺ came with approached this issue. We'll have a part 2, inshallah. If you guys have any questions, any issues that you want us to discuss, we'll talk about marriage and exactly what the role of marriage is in relation to solving this issue. What exactly you can do.
What marriage can and cannot do.
Right.
Because a lot of people have also seen, especially in the Muslim community, they use marriage as
the ultimate solution.
The ultimate solution to not just the solution to this particular issue, but the solution to all of life's problems, which it most certainly isn't. Yeah. And also, it's far more nuanced than that. And we really need to have the conversation. I haven't seen nuanced conversations regarding this topic online at all.
And this issue in particular, with regards to marriage, we briefly discussed it in our first podcast with Shabir Hassan. Yeah, so do watch that podcast as well. Let us know what you want us to discuss in the next.
I was just going to say that we'll also, and we're welcome to, any further questions, any suggestions on this particular topic. But we will talk about marriage, what it solves, what it can solve. We'll talk about pornography, also the kind of physiology and psychology related to pornography. Some of the science behind it as well, because kind of once you understand a little bit more the psychology and the kind of addiction aspect of it, that equips you better with the knowledge that you can take to kind of take on that problem from a very practical perspective. And also, when it comes to that, there's going to be differences between men and women. So we're going to talk about all of that, inshallah.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know how you found this podcast. Do you think there's a lack of these kind of conversations online? Do you think these conversations are being had? Let us know how things are in your community. Do you think things are open in your community? Do you think things are better? How do you think things can improve? In Ireland in particular, what do you think the situation is like? Let us know where you're chiming in from. How can we improve the situation in general? And we'll leave it at that. Any comments, don't forget to share the content that we have. And inshallah, we'll see you in the next one, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.